Thank you. Sorry about that. So, good afternoon. I'm also appreciative to the U.S. Human Rights Network for facilitating our participation today, and I'm appreciative of all the panelists who actually gave a lot of the talking points that will lead into what I'm saying here. So I'm going to basically be talking about the legal framework and what we have in terms of U.S. commitments and legal processes that would support the advancement of some of the, well, anyway, I'm just going to go quickly into it here. So first of all, the U.S. Adopted CERD on November 20th of 1994. The U.S. has, in addition to that, an extensive constitutional and legislative framework to address the intentional discrimination by public and private actors, but lacks the adequate protections and remedies related to the racially disparate impact of so-called neutral policies and practices. So the U.S. is under an obligation to prohibit and eliminate laws, practices, and programs which have the purpose or effect of impairing rights or freedoms based on race. The 14th Amendment of the Constitution contains an equal protection clause that formally recognizes the principle of equality before the law, and the 15th Amendment further extends the right to vote to all races. The advent of the intent doctrine, established through a 1976 court ruling, narrowed the 14th Amendment, which is critical, by requiring the victims of discrimination have to prove intent in order to discriminate, in order to be able to get a remedy. And this is in direct conflict with the convention. And all this information I'm telling you is from this report that Chandra alluded to, which you referred to. And at the end, I'm going to have my email up there where I can send you the report directly, or you can find it on the U.S. Human Rights Network website as well. So the next, okay, I think sorry. Yeah. So this is a quote from the Special Rapporteur on Racism to just kind of give us some of the views of the Special Rapporteur as it relates to our compliance around CERD. So in his 2009 visit to the U.S., he noted that the socioeconomic indicators show that poverty and race and ethnicity continue to overlap in the United States. And this reality is a direct legacy of the past, in particular slavery, segregation, and the forcible resettlement of Native Americans, which was confronted by the United States during the Civil Rights Movement. However, whereas the country managed to establish equal treatment and non-discrimination in its laws, it has yet to address the socioeconomic consequences of the historical legacy of racism. So just to give some examples, well, actually our panel has really done a good job of giving some examples around how the U.S. has failed to really live up in terms of the standards of well-being and for its residents, and particularly for racial minorities. In every indicator of human development as measured by the three core areas of well-being, as you see up there, living a long, healthy life, having access to knowledge, and enjoying a decent standard of living, racial minorities in the U.S. fall well below the mark in comparison to white counterparts. So these are just, I wanted to give, our panelists have, again, done a good job of giving a number of examples. I had a number of statistics to share, but with our 5 minutes, I didn't want to kind of go into a lot of detail, but each of these are illustrative of some statistics that I wanted to share. Well, first is 24.7% of African Americans and 23.2% of Latino Americans were poor in 2008 compared to 8.6% of non-Hispanic white Americans. Also in 2008, 3 of 4 non-Hispanic white Americans owned homes, while fewer than half of all African Americans and Latino Americans did. And in this picture, it's actually a picture of a family where because of the economic situation, there's 25 members of the family living in a very small home. And this is where the children, this isn't a slumber party, this is where they sleep every night, in the living room, because of their constrained housing situation. In terms of education, we have these policies, again, like the No Child Left Behind kind of initiatives, but yet the disparities continue. One of the issues is that we talked about the economics before. The local property taxes are actually tied directly to financing for the education system. So so it just kind of begins to build upon in terms of the violations of our rights as communities of color. So, for example, schools in the inner city neighborhoods of New York receive an average of $4,000 per year, while suburban New York schools that are predominantly white American receive $40,000 per year. So it gives you a sense of the quality of the education system based on the income, but based on these property taxes and how they're financed. Again, with the education, and actually I was shocked by this statistic, so I didn't know it myself as I was preparing for this, that 76% of white Americans hold bachelor's degrees, compared with 8% and 5.3% of black, African American, and Latino American children, respectively. So again, 76% of white Americans holding black bachelor's degrees, compared to 8% and 5.3%, respectively, of African American and Latino Americans. And students living in low-income families were approximately 10 times more likely to drop out of high school between 2006 and 2007. And again, there's a continuing high correlation between race and poverty. We already have gone into a lot of details around criminal justice, so I won't give you a whole lot, but we all know that the U.S. has this over-criminalization issue, and that we are 4.6% of the population of the world, but 22.6% of the incarcerated population. So it just, again, gives you a stark notion. And that along those, in terms of the racial and ethnic differences, while 1 in 30 men between the ages of 20 and 34 are behind bars, for black males in that age group, the figure is 1 in 9. And another statistic around that, just to give you a sense of the broad issue, is that even though that we're not doing well, one of the things under CERD is that we're supposed to be collecting data. We're not doing very well with that, but the data that is available shows that Native Americans or First Nations folks in the U.S. Suffer the grossest disproportion of executions than those of all other races. Another little known fact, I would say. In terms of the school to prison pipeline, we talk about the connection between the fact that there's a lot more emphasis on getting our youth into prison than there is actually in educating. And just as one statistic, African American youth make up 16% of the nation's overall juvenile population, but account for 45% of juvenile arrests. And then also, under the age of 17, African American youth are 19% of the population, but 65% of youth serving jail, life without parole sentences. And 26 out of every 100,000 African American youth are serving adult time in adult prison, while it's only 2.2 per 100,000 of white Americans. And just around women of color in particular, the number of incarcerated mothers has doubled from 1991 to 2007, from 29,000 to 65,000. And 1 in 15 black children and 1 in 42 Latino children have a parent incarcerated, compared to 1 in 111 white children. And then just in the last couple of statistics, and we'll quickly go through, is this is a group of Latina sisters who are fighting for reproductive rights. Latinas report being in the poorest health status of women in all ethnic groups, with disproportionately higher death rates from diabetes, the issues around access to health care that were tied to some of the immigration issues we talked about before, lack of health care, and difficulty accessing care in general. And then another statistic, this is a woman that I work with named Joyce Keller-Turner, who is HIV positive and became HIV positive through sexual assault. African American women and Latinas comprise only 25% of all women in the U.S., but they comprise 81% of new HIV infections in women. And African American women are 21 times more likely to become HIV positive than white American women. And then just the last bit of statistics that I'll give you, and again, I can also send folks this presentation if you want some of these statistics, definitely, is that 78% of African Americans live within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant and other kind of violations of air pollution laws, as compared to 56% of non-Hispanic white Americans. And asthma, which is tied to air pollution, affect African Americans at a 36% higher rate of incidence than white Americans. And African Americans are hospitalized for asthma at 3 times the rate of white Americans and die of asthma at twice the rate of white Americans. People often think of these things as maybe genetic or something, but these are very much tied to these multiple compounded issues of racism, in this regard, environmental racism. So these are the key recommendations that we came up with from the commission, the task force on the committee on the convention to eliminate racial discrimination. So ensure compliance with the obligations under CERD, as Chandra said. Ensure full implementation of CERD throughout its jurisdiction, including at the state and local levels. Ensure the full implementation of committee recommendations, which I'll go into a little detail about, from 2008 and 2001, and adopt a national action plan on racial discrimination, as Chandra said. Just a few bullet points in those last two. These are the recommendations that were given prior. Adoption of the End Racial Profiling Act, adoption of the Civil Rights Act of 2009, eliminate the National Entry and Exit Registration System, which is very much tied to a lot of the immigration issues Chandra talked about, and adopt the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Second to last slide is adopting the National Action Plan on Racial Discrimination. So these are some of the strategies that we feel need to be included in our action plan. Long-term strategic planning with appropriate funding, consultation with stakeholders including civil society, federal coordination across national, state, and local agencies, public benchmarks in key areas and steps for reaching long and short-term objectives. And the key areas were the ones that we've talked about today, although it doesn't include environment, which I think we need to add in, but poverty, employment, incarceration, health, housing, and education. So thank you. This is again my contact information. I can send you both this presentation if you're interested, as well as making sure that you know where to find the longer report that really includes pretty much everything I said. So thank you very much.